Big 12 today on Tune In Big 12 Studios with James Westling. I'm Ari Tepkin. Our full court review, Modelo's Big 12 basketball team recaps, talking Utah Utes. Andrew Crowley, host of the Runnin Hoops podcast, is joining us now here on Big 12 Radio. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Doing very well, thank you, and appreciate your time. I think it's fair to say that defensively, things were not great for Utah this past season in basketball.
That would be more than fair to say, yes.
I mean, is that ultimately why this team ended up with 10 wins and at the bottom of the Big 12?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a big part of it, right? Like when Alex Jensen joined the program last offseason, he talked a lot about those, kind of core principles of a Rick Majerus type team, right? Defense, rebounding, effort, all of those things. And you saw them in spurts this year, just didn't see them consistently enough. They had some injuries as well that impacted kind of what they were able to do on the defensive end. They lost their key rim protector before the season even started. And so a couple of guys had to slide over a few seats. And it just, it was a little bit of a recipe for disaster here in year one of Alex Jensen.
Well, with Terrence Brown entering the portal, Keanu Dawes entering the portal, when you look at the guys that are in the portal for Utah, do you think that's more the players testing the market or Alex Jensen wanting to go a different direction next season with how he builds this roster?
It's probably a little bit of both, I would say. Like, I think that because, Alex Jensen and Wes Wilcox, his general manager, are coming from that NBA background, they probably have a little bit more, stomach to tell a guy to go test the waters and see what your market is and see what you can get. But I think at the same time, if you've, listened to Alex talk in his post-game interviews and his weekly coaches show and other places, like he very clearly understands now more than ever what he needs to have in order to compete in the Big 12. And he didn't necessarily have that this season. So I think he's got a certain profile of player that he's looking for. I think a guy like Keanu Dawes and a guy like Terrence Brown would certainly fit into that if they're willing to buy in on the defensive end. But at the same time, they're going to let these guys go test the market and see what they can get.
I mean, do you think the strategy for Alex and Wes Wilcox year one was wrong? I mean, what was it, injuries? Kind of what do you attribute some of the roster mismanagement, quote unquote, to, if that is what it is in this case?
Yeah, well, Alex stayed with the Mavericks until the end of the NBA season, which I think, hurt their ability to kind of hit the ground running heading into last offseason. And so they put themselves in a position where they were behind, and then they had to take some big swings in the transfer portal. A guy like Ja'Kai Howard coming in from Auburn, Chapa Moore coming in from Syracuse, and, those two pieces didn't work out at all for the Runnin Utes. They didn't have, they didn't get any production out of those two guys. Then you have a guy like Babacar Faye that came in from Western Kentucky. He was going to be your main rim protector, and he got injured. I also think there's a little bit of this that was like, kind of learning how to fly the plane while it's in air, right? To use an analogy. I think they underestimated how difficult it was going to be to step right in, build a roster, and then compete in the Big 12.
Tell us about Jackson Johnson, who is a top 100 four-star prospect in 2024, a returning missionary who, according to 24/7 Sports, is the highest-rated basketball recruit that Utah has ever gotten. Like, he hasn't been on the floor for 2 years. He's grown. He's filled out. He could be Utah's best player. Tell us about Johnson.
Yeah, so Jackson's a 6'9", maybe 6'10", if he's grown in the last 2 years. Kind of stretch four, local kid from Alta High School in the state of Utah. First big local recruit that Utah has landed in quite some time as well. And one of these guys that I really think, the previous regime before Alex Jensen was counting on as kind of an anchor piece. Went on a 2-year mission. He's going to be back in May, but I think he is one of those guys that you can build your front court around that would allow, somebody else like a Keanu Dawes, if he elected to come back, to really play a little bit, more in his position at like the 3. Doesn't necessarily need to be your rim protector, but I think he's a guy that can come in, day one, even with those, return missionary legs that he's got to kind of shake the rust off, he's a guy that I think can really come in and help this team right away.
It's been 10 years for the Utes to make the NCAA tournament. When you look back at the last 10 years, to what do you attribute that to?
Ooh, how much time do we have? Um, it's been a little bit of everything. I think the end of the Larry Kraskowiak era was very, very bumpy. He started to have players transfer out kind of before that became the in vogue thing to do with the transfer portal. And so the fans and the donors and the admin got a little bit impatient with him. Enter Craig Smith, who had a lot of success at South Dakota and Utah State, but just he never caught the hearts and minds of the fan base. And so there's a piece of this here where the support has not necessarily been there, for the last 10 years. And then on top of that, just a lot of swings and misses, whether it's a coach, a player, an assistant coach, whatever it may be. It's just not been a well-run program, frankly, for about 10 years. And the optimism, of course, is now that, Alex is in place, Wes is in place, that those things are going to turn around and eventually the winning will come.
Andrew, where is Utah in terms of NIL? Like, what did Alex Jensen have to work with last year with the late start, and how is that different from this year?
So I think they were, I would say, bottom fourth of the Big 12 in terms of the money that they have. Obviously, the numbers that folks throw out are wide ranging and rarely accurate. I'm sure you guys are exposed to that with other teams in the Big 12. I think that as far as I understand, this offseason they're going to have more than they had last year, and potentially significantly more. I mean, not necessarily top third or top fourth, top half, but certainly enough that if they can, get some of those roster evaluations right and bring some of these players in, I think they have at least a chance to be more competitive this year and certainly push for a middle of the Big 12 spot versus a bottom four.
I mean, do they need to, where do you think their NIL is relative to the rest of the Big 12, and what about the Huntsman Center?
So the Huntsman Center they're in the process of starting a big time renovation on the Huntsman Center. It's a 15,000 seat arena. I believe they're going to drop that to like 9,000 or 9,500. Modernize the building a little bit. It's it's one of these great historic college basketball venues, but it's a little bit of a relic at this point as well in terms of the in-game entertainment. There's no suites. There's no the food options aren't great. So it's not necessarily a place that I think people think about when it comes to like going and being entertained for a night. And then on top of that, when you've got bad basketball going on, it's not a good recipe. So they're going to be fixing the Huntsman Center, over the next couple of years. I do believe that, Alex Jensen was hired in part because he was the candidate for the Utah job that was going to get them the most NIL that they could possibly get from their donors. And so I believe that they are well on their way to being more in that middle of the pack in terms of NIL support. Now, obviously, those numbers for everybody go up every year. And so I'm not sure, where they will shake out, but I would certainly put them, in the, let's just say 8 to 12 range in terms of NIL with the potential to go higher.
Okay. Yeah, that's not as bad as it could be. When it comes to Dawes, is there a chance that he maybe comes back next season?
I think there's a chance. Alex was pretty hard on Keanu most of the season. A lot of the commentary that he had about KD all season long was, I can't believe that you're better than you think you are or than you believe you are. And so, the question for KD is, and especially with Alex Jensen, is he going to buy in and do a lot of the things that Utah needs him to do as a player and as a leader? He's certainly going to have a market. I think there are a lot of schools in Texas where he's from that are going to take a long, hard look at him And so I think there's a path for him to return, but he also may get an offer that's just too good to pass up.
What about some of the other guys in the portal, or like a Terrence Brown that might end up in the NBA?
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of deal with Terrence Brown. He came in this past season from, Fairleigh Dickinson out of the NEC, and a lot of people wondered, could he make that jump to the Power 5 level, let alone the Big 12? He averaged 19.9 points per game, certainly, acquitted himself well at this level, was really the guy that most coaches in the league would focus on defensively, which, caused some of his production to drop off towards the end of the year. But I certainly think that they would welcome him back. But again, I think that he's going to have a lot of suitors, just given what he did, on a bad team, but in a very good league.
Andrew, Ari noted a poll that was done by Utah fans, and it sounds like the fans are still very much on board. They're patient. They know that this is probably a 3-year process for Alex Jensen. So what can you share with us there? And then, what do you think success looks like for next year?
Well, so on my show, I talk a lot about, if you're a Big 12 team, then your North Star every year should be the NCAA tournament, right? Like, you've got enough, quad 1, quad 2 opportunities just inside your league that, that should be something that you should be geared towards. And I think that success in year 2 for Alex Jensen really is going to be being in the mix for the NCAA tournament. I don't necessarily think that fans are going to, exit stage right if he doesn't get to the NCAA tournament in year 2, or that his seat is even going to be remotely warm if he doesn't get to the NCAA tournament in year 2. But he's got to field a much more competitive team. They've got to win some of these games that they were right there with. They had a real good chance to beat, Central Florida at home. They played BYU tough in the Huntsman Center. There were a number of games that could have swung their way. I think he's going to have to win a number of those 50-50 type games this upcoming season to show that the plan is working, right? That they're getting the right guys, that these, quote, non-negotiables that they talk about with some of their players are really taking root in the guys that they're bringing in. I do think that they're looking at a team like Illinois and they're saying, yeah, that European, model, that bringing in some European players is something that they're very enticed by, and a place where they think they can make inroads. So I think that they've got to just be a much more competitive team this upcoming season, and again, push to be in that, 10 plus range, for folks to really start to believe and start to think that this thing is going in the right direction.
All right, so where's your opinion on there?
Where do I think they're going to end up?
Yeah.
Well, obviously there's going to be a lot of changes to the roster this upcoming season, so we'll see how they do in the portal. I do think they'll be much more competitive this upcoming season. I think that, Alex and Wes have really learned that, there's a certain body type, there's a certain motor type that you've got to have in the Big 12. They've now seen it up close for 18 games. Alex has mentioned that the non-conference schedule didn't necessarily prepare them for playing in the Big 12, so I think we may see that get beefed up a little bit here in year 2. And so, I picked them, maybe foolishly, I guess, in hindsight, but I picked them to finish like 11th this past year. Obviously, that did not work out. But I think I would put them right back in that range again this upcoming season, provided that they're able to make some inroads in the transfer portal.
Andrew Crowley, host of the Runnin Hoops podcast. Andrew, thanks for your time. Appreciate it very much. Be well.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Anytime.
Andrew Crowley joining us here on Big 12 Radio as we have our full court review, Modelo's Big 12 basketball team recaps. Utah. We have K-State tomorrow?
I believe so.
Working our way up from 16-1. I think K-State was where?
K-State is the king of I'm back posts on social media after averaging about 4 or 5 points per game last season, as we saw with one individual who we'll talk more about tomorrow. But portal season, man, it's a really fun time, especially when you look at the national championship game from last night.
Right.
There was only one player in Michigan's rotation that averaged double figures, 10 or more points per game last season. Mara averaged 6.5, Johnson 7, Burnett 9, Cadeau 9, Gale 9.8. Just an incredible Indiana-like roster construction.
Well, and so I'm glad you brought up Indiana. At some point, we got to get to that. But it's so interesting because you look at guys and it's like, oh, this guy averaged 19 points a game. It just goes to show you that given the right system, dude that averaged 6 points a game can become an 18-point scorer, and a dude that averaged 18 points a game can become a 5-point scorer. So reliant on players around, scheme, fit, shots, all that jazz.
When does that scoring come? Does P.J. Haggerty average 23 points per game with most of that in the first half when K-State's in games, or does most of that come in the second half after the second media timeout and the game is pretty much out of reach? I think there's a major difference.
All right, coming up next, the 3-time Big 12 player, Tate Romney, the linebacker for Oklahoma State, who spent time at Arizona State and BYU, will join us in the final hour of the show. Plus, want to get into the Indiana-Michigan parallels here in terms of roster build. On the way next, though, the executive out of order. It's Big 12 today on Big 12 Radio, presented by Modelo, heard on TuneIn, watched on Big 12 Studios.